Hello and welcome to another episode of Warcaster, where today I'm going to be arguing in favour of theatre of the mind when playing Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I'll get into my explanation shortly, but first, if you're new here and you enjoy the content, how about dropping the video a cheeky like, or maybe even subscribing for more D&D content? Wouldn't that be neato? Right, so theatre of the mind. First things first, let's make sure we all understand what we mean when we say theatre of the mind. Essentially, theatre of the mind means that you're playing the game, in this case Dungeons and Dragons, without any sort of visual assistance. No maps, no minis, no nothing. Everything you experience comes from your imagination and the description from the Dungeon Master and how that influences your imagination. Now let's get the obvious bit out of the way. When I play Dungeons and Dragons, I use maps, and when we can play in person, I use minis. If Hero Forge or Dwarven Forge ever wanted to sponsor me, I'd probably faint from sheer happiness. Look, here's a screenshot from our last session. Look at the top left, that's a map that I made using the website Incarnate. I think miniatures are gorgeous, and I think people rightly covet them. And using some sort of custom terrain pieces is awesome. Just look at how Critical Role for how epic terrain can get. And when you get to the next level of using smoke machines and lighting effects, that's incredible. But I think theatre of the mind has its place in Dungeons and Dragons. First things first, it's cheap. And when I say cheap, I mean free. It's literally just using your imagination. Minis and maps and terrain and extra special custom pieces are really pricey, and you can circumvent all those costs by simply not having them. Just use your imagination, it's pretty powerful. But let's say you have the money for these custom awesome things, why would you still opt to use Theatre of the Mind? Well, for starters, it allows much more fluidity, especially during a combat scenario. Have you ever had an encounter that's come to a screeching halt because one of the players needs to figure out if the exact grid space they want to go on will allow them to have vision on the target they need to hit, and also make sure that that target is in range of their fireball, while also making sure that they can detonate the fireball in the exact spot where it just hits the enemies and not their allies, and they have to count out every single possibility, and then you get the confusion about diagonals and how they relate to the spell's range, and they go 5, 10, 15, no I can't go there, let me go over here, and then it's 5, 10, 15, no I can't make it there. Or the Dungeon Master, using Theatre of the Mind, could just say whether it's possible or not. I don't know about you, but that seems a bit simpler to me. It just means that there's a lot less math involved, and the DM can keep the game moving by saying if something is possible or it isn't, whether the creature is in range or it isn't, whether they can see the creature or they can't. And it allows the DM to be flexible with rulings, which every DM should be, as they can essentially alter the image they have in their head and either allow or deny things from happening. And linked to this, a Dungeon Master can improv in Theatre of the Mind. When a map is made, whatever is in that room is final. If it's on the map, it's there. And if it's not on the map, it's not there. But with Theatre of the Mind, it can be a collaborative process between the DM and the player. A player can ask, is there a desk in this room? And the DM, despite having not thought of having a desk before, can say, yeah, there's a desk, you can hide behind it. This makes the image in the players' minds much stronger. It means they're more invested in the image they have in their head. Theatre of the Mind is just a looser, more interactive, collaborative process between DM and player, and that's great. I should point out at this point that this is dependent on a DM's descriptions of environments and creatures to be decently in-depth, using more than just sight as a descriptive sense to increase immersion, but that's a whole topic for another video at some point, so let's assume your DM has some pretty decent descriptive skills. But even if the descriptions from your DM don't cover every wart on the troll's face, Theatre of the Mind can still be okay. Players filling in the blanks in their own heads can be much more powerful than whatever the Dungeon Master has in their head. I mean, take a look at horror movies, for example. When the villain of a horror movie is a shadow, a lurking presence, and you don't quite know what it is, it's infinitely more scary than if you know what it is from the get-go. Your brain fills in the blanks with the worst possible scenario, and that increases your sense of fear. It's the same for D&D. If your DM says to you, towering over you is this behemoth of a creature, blackened, almost burnt skin like charcoal. It moves erratically, creaking its bones with every twist of its joints, the smell of sulfur overcoming your nostrils as its red eyes bore into you. I can guarantee you that everyone watching this video has a different picture of what that creature looks like than what I have. And that's awesome. D&D isn't necessarily about all buying into the same shared vision of what's happening. Each player can have their own take and their own perspective on the environment around them, and they will do because everyone has experienced different things in their life and can draw on different influences. Even if I said something as simple as, the ground you're walking on is a mixture of grass and rocky terrain, guaranteed everyone has got a different picture in their head of what that means. Letting people have their own interpretation can be vital for immersion. But you want to know what's even worse though? Your DM finishes describing the epic chamber you found yourself in. The room you walk into has intricate carvings, artwork plastering the walls, with elegant fountains decorating the pathway ahead, the light tinkle of the water reverberating off the tall ceiling as the crystal chandeliers above reflect the light which cascades off the pouring water, sending beams of light in all directions. At the far end of this room, as you knew it would be, stands the elegant throne of the castle. The only thing between you and the throne is the person sitting on it. Roll for initiative. Let me just grab the map here real quick. Promise you, this one's going to be great, guys. Don't you think, in a scenario like this, don't you think it might just be better to have people imagine the room? Because I guarantee you, everyone listening to that description had their own image of what that room looked like. And what I presented as the DM as fact, that map is less impressive than what you had in your head. It's underwhelming. So I think unless you can make slightly more accurate or impressive looking maps, it might just be better to let your players imagine it. They have a stronger image of what it's like. Is Theatre of the Mind the only way to play? Absolutely not. But nor is just using maps and minis. Both have their place when playing Dungeons & Dragons, and both should be used for different scenarios. Will I be using Theatre of the Mind going forwards? Maybe sometimes. But that's not because using maps and minis is necessarily better. I just like the process of creating maps. And on a personal note, it allows me to provide a better initial description of a new location to my party. But if you can describe a scene properly, there's no reason that Theatre of the Mind can't be as good, if not better, than a map. So that's my argument in favour of playing with Theatre of the Mind in Dungeons & Dragons. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe and enable notifications. I also stream games on Twitch, so follow me on twitch.tv/warcasterpq for more over there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.